Welcome everybody to another episode of my podcast, and as my regular listeners will know, I'm always delighted to have my guests on, and today of course is no different. I met today's guest, Ash Roots, who is currently in between jobs. This is day one of between jobs, I believe. When Ash was talking about cereal packets on LinkedIn, I think that's how we first came to across each other. We connected. I looked at Ash's background, thought you look interesting because of you do all things digital, and then you made the announcement of where you're going, which I won't spoil it just now, but also it's a place that is close to my heart. So Ash, without further ado, another brick in the wall. This will make sense, people, for any Pink Floyd fans. But I always start off with kind of who, what, why, when, where, and then let's see which rabbit hole this takes us down. Over to you.
Right. So you want me to introduce myself first, I assume?
Yeah, that's it.
The idea.
Who, what, why, when, where?
You said in between jobs, so it means I'm half asleep. So I'm Ash. Thank you for inviting me, by the way, because it's been great with a lot of chats. But I'm Ash. I've always been involved in anything to do with the internet, and I was very lucky. I actually did one of the first degrees in the internet. So I was a web designer, and then over the years, I've just bounced between different industries and organisations, partly by luck, but now by choice. And now, as you said, I'm starting a new role in higher education, which I'm really looking forward to, because I'm really passionate about learning, and I love changing stuff with technology in the core. There you go. Is that right?
That's all right. That works absolutely fine. And it's higher education in terms of, if I may be so bold, it's the University of Exeter. Is that correct? We're going in as their chief digital officer, I believe.
Yeah. I'm not very good with titles and things like that. It doesn't really register on my radar. I just like solving problems. But yes, you're right. Officially, as LinkedIn will profess at some point, probably tomorrow, Chief Digital Officer, ex-university, very lucky to working, directly for them and Lisa Roberts, who's the Deputy Vice Chancellor, as I'm learning all the lingo. And yeah, we're going to go in there and try and make education more accessible and scale it and come up with new ideas to make the experience even better for students and for people that want research from them using tech. That's as much as I know at the moment, right? So I'll have to see what... I'll tell you in a year's time what actually happened.
Where it's going. And the reason it's a place close to my heart is that's where I studied for 4 years at the University of Exeter. So an amazing time down there in Devon. It's a great place, great campus, and some great people. So that's what's close to my heart.
You're not the only person, by the way, who's come out of the woodwork saying they went there. It's like, and by the way, what I love, out of any organisation we ever spend time at in our lives, universities, for those of us that have been to them, and it's not for everyone, is actually people always look at them quite fondly. It's quite interesting. But anyway, I think you liked it.
Yeah, I did. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, I didn't really do enough work to get a degree of any consequence. I got a Desmond in modern languages, but here I am in terms of doing what I'm doing, working for one of the foremost digital transformation consulting firms in the world. So it just goes to show this: the degree doesn't necessarily mean it's the end to where you want to get to. And I guess that's kind of where I want to go with this in terms of your experience across the organizations that you have worked for, the fact that you did the first degree in the web, or the interweb and the internet. I mean, you've lived and breathed this from day dot. And if I look at the narrative that's kind of coming out, going the VR or the metaverse or the omniverse, whatever we're going to call it, it's a waste of time, isn't going to work, versus those people saying this is the future. I guess that's where we were back in the mid-90s. For the internet. So what's your journey? What have been the key learnings for you in terms of where you've got to today around all things digital and how things work and tech and all that sort of things from a business perspective? And then how are you going to take that learning, that experience into the world of education? Because if we, as a parent, if like through certainly the lockdown in the last 2 years, our school did a good job for the kids, trying to get them spun up as quickly as possible onto Google Classroom and Teams. But it was a bit clunky. Our daughter hated it. She really didn't, take to it at all. I mean, she's 6, so she's not a, teenager. But again, talking to parents with older kids, some of them struggled in that environment just because the way or the medium in which the education was being done in this environment just was not the same as being in a classroom, notwithstanding the poor teachers who had to quickly, gen up on all of this. It sometimes feels like some of the chief execs I work with, or some of the people I work with. But a bit of what you see in the key moments, and then how you believe that will translate into the world of education.
So to prove I've never heard these questions before, I've got to write down bits, right? So that's good proof.
I did warn you, this is just going to be all over the place.
No, it's good. It's good. I've got my brain is a bit awkward at times, so it doesn't let me retain lots of information. So I'm gonna and see where we can go here. So the first thing was quite interesting, where you started off talking about metaverse and VR and AR. And if you take one of the first things I have learned through my experience of being involved in, very simply, change that's related to the internet, if I really simplify it, is that no one yet can predict the future, as far as I know it. So take the recent announcement, like when Mark Zuckerberg says metaverse, right? And you get a very polarized response. And this has been the same over the years I've been alive and I've observed stuff. With the basic understanding of no one can predict the future, no one really knows whether it's going to be successful or not. So in all change, one of my biggest learnings is don't judge until you've actually, until it's happened or till it's being tried, right? So, specifically on things like augmented reality, virtual reality, metaverse, you could kind of go, wow, that as a concept can blow a lot of people's brains. But then second part is, with anything where you're trying to predict, is you kind of want to look at what got you here and the trend to get where you might go next. And there is some plausibility, right, in the fact that a degree of and augmented reality is interesting, because I like the word augmented, because it's where you mix things together, and you can kind of see where it's starting to leak into our lives at different rates of this ability to either be with someone physically or with someone virtually, and then a frustration sometimes, or a problem that could be solved by a mixture of the two. So it's a very simple example, one of the ones I've noticed for many of us in every discipline since the pandemic and meant that we had to do remote working. People like me that got bad memory, the best augmented reality thing from video calling was people's names are on the bottom of the screen. Because it meant that in a physical world, you'd stand there going, God, what is that person? I remember them, but I don't know who they are, right? And then in a great way of the video call is that you just look down to the left, no one notices, they think you might, you might be flitting, and suddenly, boom, you've got it. Now, if you times that by 1,000,000% and take the metaverse, there could be loads of situations. And one of the specific examples with the metaverse type thing, someone said to me, which I thought was quite good, is like, we're all struggling to focus now because of what technology has done. Faster, more, more stuff going on, notifications. I don't know if it's me or you with them still on. It's probably me. No one really knows anymore. No one can really manage it. It's like, where are they coming from? And so actually one of the benefits of the metaverse, as an example, could be the fact that people can focus again. Weird, right? So the first category of what you're saying, and tell me if you need me to go down any path, is like, no one can predict the future. You just look at the trends and you look at it and go, well, it could be plausible. But the point is, no one knows. So anyone that's a naysayer to something that's not existing, you can kind of say, well, is that more about you and about your own fear or your own it's probably fear. That's what Paul, it's probably fear, right? That's right. So then the other parts is, and then kind of leading about this, one of the other things you mentioned, is that, why education, or why any organization, or how can the adoption be? Now, what I have noticed moving from different industry to different industry is that there are common themes about change. It so happens that the change, in very simple terms, some call it the fourth generation, is the internet has meant that, and some people don't even know if we're at the beginning, middle, or the end. We don't know. But the point is, what it has done has meant that connectivity or connection to others and pace and scale are just unprecedented. So a lot of the time for organizations, the challenge is actually not getting in the way or being in the way of the thing that's going to happen. So your example of schools and education, for those of us that got kids, and actually, if you look at our parents' generation, take the VHS or Betamax, is like generally the generation lower than the generation above, I don't know how to describe it, generally gets the stuff going on faster. So, you know, I would remember teaching my parents how to use a VHS. Now my kids teach me how to use Roblox and how to use TikTok. We all know this, but the point is, it's like in organizational context, or even in parenting as the parallel, it's normally the parents or the organization that are trying to prevent the change happening. You know, parental controls, don't understand it, therefore don't use it. Organizations, the same logic, right? Don't understand it, don't get it. This has worked for the last 10 years. Why would you want to do something different? So kind of the second key point is about helping organizations get out of the way. Now, that might be a bit pokey language because it's not supposed to sound negative or aggressive or anything like that, but it's like getting out of the way has got to be like educating the, you know, in my case, could be educating the educators, right, on technology. It could be about comfort. I mean, you know, what I see a lot is people concerned about the impacts of something on themselves. So therefore, how can you help people realize, well, actually, maybe the impact could be positive, but help them through it. Then the last one I'll mention, in kind of, in terms, I think this is relevant to your question, is then focusing on the person that consumes the thing. And it is a fascinating thing, right, that I've learned loads recently in my family life, let alone my work life, is we tend not to focus on the end consumer of the thing, the task, the activity, the product we're doing. Most of us don't really do it. We think we do, but we don't. And if you solve that problem, then it's much easier to navigate any change, because you can connect. I know, as an example, and this is a bit tenuous, but you know, like metaverse sounds bonkers until you find a particular user case and you find a problem that someone's having, and you say, well, it could solve it. And that's what I think organizations in any context, whatever they're doing, is that they are learning that some people call it the customer, some people call it user, person, employee, whatever. If you always relate whatever you're doing to them, then you can quickly work out whether the thing you're doing should happen or not, not based upon how you feel or what anyone else thinks, but based upon the person you're trying to solve the problem for. So, and I think that is one of the biggest learnings for most organizations, because most organizations in the work context, we're still used to factories. That's the way we think. We still think 9 till 5. We still sometimes have clocking in. We still have managers. We still get told what to do. We still have reviews that happen every year, you know, like, but actually the boss is not your boss. The boss is the person that consumes the product, because if the consumption of the product or service dries up, there's no company. And so therefore...
there's some really, sort of just to reflect, there's some really interesting, and I love the way that you kind of break it down and kind of make it simple, because it is simple, but it isn't simple. And I've heard a few others use that expression. Kind of, there's a chap called Andrew Huff who's trying to reinvent or professionalize sales, if you will, in terms of sales actually become professional, like in you would in marketing or accounting or legal. And he talks about getting out of the way of yourself. And I'm also going to reflect on a post I saw about podcasts where it was all talk about people's stories and not enough kind of action. So I think my podcast pretty give action-oriented points for people to talk about. But reflecting them on your experience, of course, your experience, if I am correct, has been on the consumer side of kind of things in terms of the telco world has been focusing as in the consumer buying device or consuming it from a consumer perspective, not so from a B2B perspective, and the humanization, if you will, of kind of business to business and so on. How does a person who's trying to drive change help somebody understand that they may actually be getting in the way? Because sometimes people don't really realize they're actually the blockers, and it could be because of seniority, it could be because of any number of things. So how do you actually help someone articulate, look, you're kind of getting in the way of things, so get out of the way? And how do you then start to, when you get to the so there's the second part of the question then is that end user bit. And I use CRM as an example. When people say the CRM is crap, well, the CRM isn't crap because it's an innate piece of technology. It's been led by a bunch of people who haven't gone to the person that's going to use it day in, day out and understood, is this actually going to solve a problem for them in terms of, well, the way I'm currently doing things works fine for me on my spreadsheets. It's doing what I want to do. I guess that, and this would again reflecting on my times of being at a university as a student, if you look at a student as an employee to some respect, you've got then lots of different users, if you will. And what's the thing about users? They'll either use drugs or software. That's the two things, right? Who have different views on life. So how does an organization, how do you strike the balance between trying to make sure that what you're deploying does answer that without getting it to the point that you become almost inertia strikes because no one can actually agree on what it is that it wants to do because too many chefs go, I want that widget, or I don't want to do that, or I want it that color and not that color. I want the font slightly bigger. How do you kind of stop going down that route? So how do you help people understand they're in the way and get out of the way? And then part two, how do you stop almost corporate inertia because you're getting too much, I guess, user feedback to actually get to where you want to get to?
So first about getting in the way. I mean, I think we all get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first point, is to position it not as some people get in the way and some people don't. Not saying you were, but it's quite, it's like, it's a bit like agility as a separate point. When organizations talk about, we want to be an agile organization. Someone said to me once, which has always stuck with me, is that every organization is already agile. Right. Otherwise it's not moving. Question people should be asking is, how do I respond in the appropriate manner for the particular problem I'm trying to solve, which might mean faster, slower, or something else. Anyway, so going back to the getting in the way, you start off with the position of, assume everyone's always getting in the way, just different degrees of getting in the wayness. If you start off with that thinking, then it goes back to kind of what I said before, really, is the fact that actually, how do you recognize whether something getting in the way is impacting to a positive or negative degree? Because that's always the thing. It's like, I'm getting in the way because I need clarity, or because we need to have due diligence, or we need to manage our risks. I mean, I've heard it all. Or you go the other way, like, you're getting in the way because of bureaucracy, take too long to make decisions. I mean, it's literally every test case. Put the problem in the middle. Now, but the challenge with organizations to put a problem in the middle is very difficult. So you do have to do work, which is like, whether you call it creating the conditions, and this is where digital transformation really is at the heart, and it's just transformation of an organizational entity, which is why words, which can then float off and mean many things or people roll their eyes at, but co-creation is one of those things, the conditions you need to create, i.e., you want people to, regardless of their hierarchy or their skill set, to believe, understand, or support, whatever the word might be, that they're all in it together to solve that problem in the middle. So as an example, if you started with that as a working premise, then if you're all solving a problem, when you're analyzing what is the problem, how do we solve it, you will then identify the impediments, is a word I love because it doesn't sound like problems, but what are the things getting in the way? Is it a person? Or is it a process, or is it something else? And then what you do is you remove the personal part of getting in the way of a person. So and there are other attributes of the conditions, which would also be, collaborating is different to co-creating, right? So co-creating is saying that everyone, whether, in any part of the organization, and it's that, go back to that space quote, the guy sweeping the floor, launching space rockets. Remember, everyone knows that one, don't they?
No, forgive me.
The Apollo. I think it's from the Apollo flights. Was about, there was a janitor who was sweeping the floor, and someone went up to him and said, "What's your job here?" And he didn't say, "I'm sweeping the floor." He says, "I'm helping land on the moon."
Yeah.
That was his.
Yeah.
That was the phrase, isn't it? So if you take you take the co-creation part, that's about every person feeling they're solving the problem. Which, if you imagine, in most organizations, if someone was sweeping the floor, I doubt they probably think they're actually delivering the products and services. So there's a bit of work there. But the collaboration part is actually where you're actually helping each other. It's not about a team working together, like you're doing your bit, I'm doing my bit. There's of course there's that, but it's more about you're all trying to help each other solve that problem in the middle. Again, going back to your point about getting in the way, it will mean that there'll be kind of that psychological safety will be created of the fact that if someone is Ash, sorry, you keep asking us to do that thing over and over again. The problem we're trying to solve, we all agree with it. Yeah. Can you stop it? And so it's actually, you create the conditions. So that they're kind of two things. I mean, it's never that simple because, as we know, there are all the phrases in the book about, the most important person in the room makes all the decisions. I can't remember these phrases, but they always live in your brain. And so they need a bit of time for the conditions to be created to make that work. The other bit you were mentioning was about kind of, I think if I understood, was like, but then how do you agree what is the thing to how do you solve the problem? Is that fair?
Yeah.
Is that kind of
it's how do you solve the problem? Absolutely. But again, if I'm just reflecting on my journey as before coming full-time where I am now as an independent, going back into organizations and being that outsider in, you always actually get the warts and all what's happening because people are more honest with you. But also being in a world where the business has got good intentions and we're trying to fix a process which could be done better, but they got too many opinions from people who are going to use the new tool, that eventually it just didn't go anywhere. Money was being burnt because they were trying to create something which was going to be all things to all people rather than what it was originally intended to, because they were trying to be a good corporate by inviting feedback, but it almost bit them in the backside because then they couldn't actually do what they wanted to do, because when it launched, nobody was happy.
And what you're describing, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's one answer that satisfies a whole multitude of situations, but I'll throw a few bits out there. One is the principle about value and effort as a principle. Like I personally have learned through specific like software development, so take your lean startup model, down to your more organic, how do you develop teams, down to your how do you change an organization, to how do you run your family life. The phrase of value and effort is a really good equation, right? It's the simplest thing of like, how much value can I generate from the least amount of effort? So that's a kind of a principle. So you just basically, whatever you're doing to make a sandwich, you get the idea. It's a bad analogy. So if you had that as an overarching principle, it will depend on the circumstance, because you mentioned as an example, if you're a third party, who is your master? Is it we all been there, right? A third party knows that they might lose their contract with an organization if they don't do what the customer, or the client is probably a better word, the client wants, regardless of whether it's what the customer wants. So there's a bit of complication in that, and that's just probably where values of organization steps in and that stuff, which is a separate conversation. But if you boil it down to how do you make sure that you are not procrastinating, fixing the right problem, managing the voices in a room of whatever the room is, then this is obviously the use of data, the use of experimentation, the use of creating an operating model that people buy into, the principles about things like upfront planning. And there is science to disprove the fact that, and we've all been there, the more time you spend on something doesn't mean it's actually going to be better, right? Because the fact is, if you go back to value and effort, the value you're generating of creating a PowerPoint deck or a plan is actually zero until it gets to the end user. So I'm kind of talking a bit high level because it's without specifics, but for me, generally, if you're working backwards from the problem of the user and orientating your thinking around, okay, value and effort to solve this problem. Because it could be that the problem could be solved in 10 minutes, but a lot of the time we don't change our way of solving a problem for different problems as well. So as an example, take a consulting intervention, which you'll know, right? And I've been in many of them. They generally have a standard format regardless of the problem you're solving, right? you know, there'll be a pitch. You'll select the party. The party will probably have loads of PowerPoint. I don't know. Once you've done that, then there'll be a discovery phase. Then there'll be this and that and this. But hold on here. Is every problem the same size? And it's probably not. So, but that's a very particular flavor. But you know, I'm trying to stress the point to get the key theme out, right? Is focus on solving the problem in front of you. Do the least amount of effort. Use data so it's not personal. And if worst case, and I've been in this situation too, is you do end up with casts of thousands, because in certain organizations, that's what happens.
Yeah.
Then you got to go a little bit rogue.
Awesome. You're man after my own heart, because that's definitely what I tend to do.
I mean, one of the phrases I've learned in change, and it's not just digital, is that, and especially, I'm dyslexic, and I've learned through feedback that I don't always communicate effectively. Sometimes people go, "Cool, you're amazing. You really communicate the thing really well." And other times it's like, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. It's just a really horrible juxtaposition, because I don't know, like even now, I don't know whether I'm communicating effectively or people are going, "What is he talking about?" So what I've learned, and actually it's the same if you can't predict the future, and the fact that the learning is only actually through giving it to the end user, is showing, not telling, is the power. So even if me and you talk about some ideas of how to solve a problem, the only way you and me are really going to be on the same page is when we see it and go, "Oh, okay, I understand what you meant now. Okay, got it." You know, because, and I also, you know, and I think that's a trend I've also noticed, is that being uncomfortable is not the place we really generically choose to be in a workplace. We try and avoid the discomfort, even though a lot of us can be uncomfortable through imposter syndrome or whatever, just organically. So what I've noticed, which I think is fascinating, is that actually that discomfort is something that actually could be capitalized on when it comes to making choices. Because actually what you're trying to do is you're trying to help people realize that if we don't know what the answer is, the best way of finding out is to get it out there.
Yeah. And
then you'll get the comfort through actually someone saying, "This is brilliant," or "This is not so good," or something else. Do you see what I mean? Not through a business case.
I'm really enjoying this conversation, and for me, certainly, you are articulating in a very coherent and easy to digest way, which I think is half the challenge. Is people try and come out with all these big words to sound intelligent, and actually just keep it simple and break it down. I'm loving solve the problem in front of you. You know, you use data to inform, so it's not personal. Show and tell is a big thing for me around. And it's easier in terms of my world around digital selling and digital sales. And, you know, especially with things like LinkedIn, because it's okay, well, that's just no PowerPoints, bish, bash, bosh, 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 dish. And you can see the light bulb goes, "Oh my God, that's amazing. I didn't know you could do that." When they see it, you then let them go. And then it's like, okay, that's how I do it, but how might you do something different to achieve the end goal that you're trying to do? And the minute they can touch and feel it, and then it's back to your point, let's then row all the way back to the problem we're trying to solve, because now you can kind of see the end state. Now you get a sense of kind of where we could get to. Let's work through this to get to, it might not be that end state, it might be slightly different based on what your needs are. Whereas too often it's the discovery phase. Let's talk about stuff. Well, okay, we're going to talk about stuff we already know. I want to know what we don't know in terms of taking us to the future. And I'm all for going rogue where going rogue is appropriate. But and again, reflecting on what you're saying about being uncomfortable, I'm a big proponent of Carol Dweck and her mindset theory, and around having a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. You know, she wrote it in the late 90s. She's a professor at Stanford, and you can be a blend of both in terms of work, business, relationships, marriage, parenting. It's changed how we parent in terms of you know, how you praise your children in certain ways. But I always think,
what's the tip in that?
So basically, it's around you need to help the child understand how they got to that point, rather than going, "You're brilliant." You need to get them to reflect on how did they get to that point. Because basically, fundamentally, her view is if you're a fixed mindset, you are at the pinnacle of what can be known, and there is no more to know. If someone challenges that mindset, that A, makes you feel uncomfortable, and B, you push those people away. So she cites Enron as an example. The chief executive of Enron was a fixed mindset person, refused to accept any other way was possible, surrounded himself with people who just pandered to that and agreed to it. And then that continues the cycle of I'm the best, I'm the best, I'm the best. And then the rest tells, Enron tells its story. Professional service firms, law firms, probably a lot of fixed mindset mentality. And it's not, so I try and help people understand that, and I have a fixed mindset in some aspects of what I do, and I get feedback on it in terms of, I probably won't be a very good people manager because I get frustrated when people just don't get it, which is ironic, seeing as I'm in a consulting space with people who I'm consulting to. It's very different to people that are within my own kind of business units, if you will, versus the fixed mindset where fundamentally you can grow, you can learn, you're not always right. And that's, the book is around how you can move yourself from one to the other, but she talks about being uncomfortable. So when I ever kick off my sessions, I kind of do a Carol Dweck kind of brain with this and that. And I will tell people, if what is happening during what I'm talking about makes you feel uncomfortable, makes you feel a bit icky, then what I'm doing is working, because I'm forcing you to start looking at this in a different way. Rather than if you just sit back and go, I know this all, then there's no point you being in the room. But again, that's very, to your point, that's very hard for people to deal with, or dare I say, articulate in a group environment. This is making me feel uncomfortable because they don't want to feel stupid, they want to feel that they don't know the answer, and so on. So very much singing from the same hymn sheets on all of that. So as you've been talking, I'm sitting here listening to you going, me in business context, me as a student at Exeter University. So two very different things. Some might say not. And of course, the education system has changed massively from when I was a student, whatever it was, when did I go to university? Late 90s, early 2000s, I think I graduated in inverted commas.
You did graduate. And by the way, the important thing, which I've picked up, and I don't know, my experience of higher education is only as a customer, not as anything else. So I've got a lot to learn. But what is interesting, you said, Desmond Tutu, yeah. If I'm right.
Yeah.
You positioned it as not a success.
Yeah.
What I do know is that the higher education experience in itself is the success as well as the qualification. Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, I know you just said it, but it's like, one thing I've picked up already speaking to students, which I love. It's like, to have your customers in front of you, and you're going, well, how can I make your life better with this tech? Is that the experience is really important. But then and I know you're trying to put it back to education, but I think there's such a relationship between two. When you look at our lives and our work, is that we're definitely moving from a place of experience versus experiences,
right?
And potential is more important in work than ever before. So what I mean by that is we used to recruit people saying, what have you done? I mean, age used to be quite important, dare we say it. Seniority used to be a thing. But the internet has completely transformed, right? First of all, knowledge is no longer that superpower, which is a phrase I like, right? It used to be that you have to know stuff, but you don't now, because if you ask me anything, within 10 seconds, I'd have probably had the answer, right? Yeah. So there's no longer a strength in being the boss in the room that said, I remember 10 years ago, we had this situation. This must be the answer. And it's like, what? So it says that the pace of change, the fact that actually you go back to we talked about the communication, the ability to have resilience, the ability to be able to be selective, the ability to be able to be human and communicate. Anyway, all those factors. Mm-hmm. Could it be, this is a question, and this might get me in trouble, but that the tutu is less important than the experience of you learning about yourself, how to, leave home probably, to experience stuff, to understand your health, your well-being, to be educated on how to develop yourself, to make choices. I mean, anyway, Sorry, I just, because I would rather everyone now grows up knowing how to adapt and respond and react and deal with people and deal with change and deal with discomfort than walks around with the qualifications and job titles. That's what I think.
You raise a very interesting point, because reflecting now, and hindsight's a fair thing, right? And talking, you can't predict the future. Look at trends, right, in terms of where it's gone. Yeah. Back then, because my and this is, I wasn't paying for education. I was very lucky. I had the final year where it will, the state paid for it, so my parents weren't even paid for it. My father, ex-army kind of background, was disappointed that I got a 2-2 versus a 2-1. It's through my own fault. I just didn't really understand how much weight the first year carries, so I just messed around basically and had good fun, right? had an experience. But now I'm going through life, almost 44, married, kids. You reflect on that and you go, yeah, the experience was awesome. And that's what I remember is my time at university, is the experience that gave me, not the fact that I got a 2-2 and a degree, which I don't really use anyway, because that's my career is taking me to where I am. And I believe that it's a really interesting concept around experience versus experience. And if you look at kind of conversations that I've, internally around me, as I'll talk about in the green room, an individual saying to me that they believe that LinkedIn will be dead in 12 months' time because it's based on assumption of the content's not delivering what they think it should be, because they need to shift their viewpoint on what it could be for them if they chose to kind of open up their mind a little bit around getting it to work for me, versus looking at people posting TikTok videos going, well, this isn't a place for TikTok videos. Well, do you actually understand why that's happening? Why the content is changing in of itself? And I therefore believe, going back to the concentration piece, around going to the full circle back to the metaverse and kind of me concentrating as students, and then concentrating now in this kind of weird world, to your point, stuff going on. I mean, I don't know. I bought an Oculus headset a couple of weeks ago because I was frustrated about people having an opinion on something where they definitely haven't been in VR, so they don't really understand it. But the ability to have kind of and take this in the vein that it's meant, have you shut off from the outside world for a period of time to focus solely, in my case, Beat Saber, on Oculus, trying to play that. And I'm trying to play Population of One, but
not killing zombies. Then that's what I tend to do.
No, I've downloaded Population of One, and I need to buy a bigger house with more space. I keep walking into our bifold doors, but that ability to just, everything else is just gone. It's incredible. But the co-creation bit and the collaboration bit, again, I can see how, Horizon workrooms and that environment can be an amazing place, not only from a business perspective, but also for students from a learning environment to all sit there and put your VR goggles on and not have some crusty old lecturer talking about, for my world, Cervantes and, the gold.
That's what you said, by the way. I didn't say that.
No, I said that. Yeah. Is that you can go and be there. You don't have to learn it. You can actually experience it in VR.
I'm with you, and going back to my position of like, none of us really know what will work. Well, but one of the go back to trends as well, because I do believe in every situation there's a fundamental at play in everything we do in life. And I've experienced this too. It's a phrase I always had in my head now. Whenever I get stressed, overwhelmed, anxious, or even if I'm happy, but generally it's normally the negatives for some reason, it's the way my brain works, I have to separate me from the situation. Because I tend to if I don't do that, I tend to not see the difference. Yeah. So the situation, the fundamentals of that situation are always important. So if you look at the trends in terms of, like, you're describing a specific, call it corner. Yeah. Is that the trend is that the human is becoming more sophisticated than ever before. So, and my history is not great, so anyone can probably challenge me on this, but in very simple terms, we know that equality is becoming really important in not just gender, but in every way. Lots of us are trying to get our heads around it. I've come from a privileged white background. You know, I'm a standard bloke, bald, white. I mean, there's many of us, right? And if you take into account like the logic here, ignoring the long words of diversity and inclusion, which are the words, but they sometimes don't always get the right response. But the fact is that actually, regardless of who you are, we just want you to be your best.
Yeah.
The problem is historically, there haven't been many variables or choices or options for variety. You know, like, you know, take school, go to a classroom, sit at desks, someone's at the front, exams. I mean, I remember exams, I hate them. Like English was like, oh, freak me. I literally would, you know, but the point was, it was, you know, there was the fundamental there was get a qualification, like a 2-2, and then you get a job.
Yeah.
Now we're realizing that, as an example, like, you know, diversity of thought, of activity, of background, of whatever it would be, is great for solving things, right? It's a really good human race trait, but we don't have enough of the tools. Yeah. Now, as an example, like the metaverse, and you know, and I don't want this to be a metaverse, and I don't know you do. It's like, because we don't know, but what's great by it is like focus. You know, like this might mean that there's a minority group of people that have been excluded from previous engagement that now could be included. Now, of course, the counter will be is it might exclude some people, but this is the beauty of the augmented nature, is it might mean, I mean, take introverts and extroverts, a classic. Me and my wife are either. Yeah. And there are many books written in business about introverts just not making it. Now, could you imagine if the technology is, you know, technology is driving us talking about people, well-being, behavior, diversity and inclusion. I completely believe that. You know, if it wasn't for Facebook and its polarization, would we really be actually having some of these horrible conversations? You know, would like Black Lives Matter really be something that white people really thought differently about if it wasn't for the media and the internet? But then you take all that and you go, wow, maybe we could solve this differently. And it could be that, you know, my wife, as an example, and it's a bit unfair talking about her because she's downstairs, but is like, you know, an introvert now goes, wow, I've now got the ability to not feel comfortable because I don't believe in comfort, but at least the mechanic to be on level pegging with an extrovert, as an example. Yeah. And so I'm with you in the fact that, you know, of course, a user case is I can focus, which is great. But what I love by the step back, the fundamental is, imagine if these tools are going to enable a more, I don't know, I don't really like the phrase, but level playing field, or just, actually that's not the phrase, is it? But just enable people to shine that couldn't shine before. Yeah. And then imagine then the answer to the questions. The only thing I will say though, and I've always had this triangle in my head, right? This is a fundamental. I'm not saying this is right. This is Ash thinking. Organizations normally are like that. Right? Yeah. It could be a club, it could be a business, right? There's normally someone at the top and there's people, and normally the lower down you go, the less you get, whatever that might be. Yeah. Less decisions, right? What we are talking about is this.
So Ash just turned the triangle upside down for those that are listening.
Exactly. Everything we're talking about is the upside down, right? And it makes sense, right? If you want the most ideas, don't have one person coming up with them, have everyone, right? If you want to make the most impact, have the biggest movement. If you want to have, you know, the greatest scale of change, you get the idea. Yeah. All of these factors, which is what, you know, it's a fundamental, is that what organizations are struggling with, whether it's individuals or the structure or the system, is that flip. So even if, you know, like a metaverse, it is kind of liked by the few, it's got to be liked by the top. Yeah. Or go back to my conditions, you change the conditions, which actually is never going to be a flip like that. I don't know how to draw it in my fingers, but you start to create movements within it, which actually takes away, like we said before, the things that get in the way, which is not saying they're people, but is likely to be the organizational shape. I went off on one a bit there.
Apologies. No, you didn't. I think, and again, you know, it's for those that are listening, Ash is kind of demonstrating with his hands. And again, when you visually look at things, you show.
Oh yeah, sorry, that wasn't helpful.
Yeah, it's fine. I have to remind people that are listening that we're doing triangles and upside down triangles, and the people that are watching, people are watching this all makes, you know, more sense. But again, it's the show and tell piece, and that's what people argue about, you know, whiteboarding and actually drawing diagrams and stuff. And I know I'm stuck on the metaverse, but the whiteboard function and Workrooms Horizons Horizon Workroom is just awesome. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
It's just massive. It's just such a cool thing to do.
Well, a quick one. It's like tools like Mural and Miro.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, as an example, we're definitely at the BT ways of working. When we were all at home, we were using Mural to like, you know, like create stuff. And it was great because it was like real time. We were replacing PowerPoint. And what it meant was when you're in a meeting and someone said, can you change the PowerPoint deck? And you go, yes, no problem. Should we schedule another meeting in a week's time to come back and play back what we changed in the PowerPoint deck? And we go, no problem. Very good idea. Oh, yeah. Actually, you just changed it there live, right? Yeah. You know, let alone when people then met up physically. And this is a true story for the design team. It was brilliant. They were like, they sat there for a bit, tapping their fingers, trying to go back to the old model of drawing on the whiteboard. And they went, is it all right if we get Mural out? And they all sat in a room together on their laptops, together with Mural on their computers, using it. But then when they had to, they went, right, okay, let's just change mode. Let's have a chat. Let's have a coffee. Let's go back to Mural. I mean, and that's another classic of like, you'd never have dreamed that would be a good thing, but it's been brilliant. You go back to value and effort, you get more effort in the short space of time. Yeah, or more value. Sorry,
more value with less effort in a shorter space of
you know what I mean.
Shorter space of time. And I think let's leave people with flipping the system. I think that's a nice way to end. And we could talk about this for forever and a day. And maybe I'll get you back on in a year's time so you can let us know how your journey into higher education has gone and what we've learned from there.
Well, on that note, if I can mention, right. I am TikToking. I'm one of those annoying TikTokers that's trying to put it on LinkedIn because I'm just trying to see. I'm not going to knock it until I've tried it.
Yeah.
And I get so many people rolling their eyes at me, and I kind of like, well, whatever. But if you fancy just laughing at me, just follow me on TikTok. I've got about 3 followers, so you know you'll be in pleasant company.
I'm one of them.
Yeah, don't say that.
Ash, I'll put the very links to if you want to reach out to Ash and follow Ash, please mention this podcast. As I said, he's in between roles at the moment, moving to a really important role, CDO at Exeter University, to empower higher education in all of this, because this is the future of all of us, right? Follow him on TikTok. I'll put the link there as well. But Ash, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time and insight. I've certainly got a lot of takeaways that I'm going to start to think about how I can implement in my day-to-day. Ash, thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And as always, everybody, thank you for tuning in. If you want to be on this podcast, you know what to do. If you want to recommend people be on this podcast, you know what to do. Otherwise, wherever you are in the world, I will see you on the flip side. Until next time.